to Conversation Cafe. Today we will be talking about education inequity, so the race disparities in education. Why is that a problem? And we have three lovely guests here, my family members, Jay Davon, my brother, Tasha Thomas, my mother, and Mark Thomas, my father. So let me just break down the rules to you all. Like I said, this is a roundtable discussion, but for the first two rounds, there will be no feedback, no response, just your thoughts on the topic. So like I said, just to brief you again, the topic is education inequity, not inequality, inequity. Because low income and high poverty schools get low funding as compared to high income, low poverty schools, okay? So that's the topic, and I'm going to start, and then you guys can continue, follow my lead, okay?
Absolutely. Okay.
So, my thoughts on the topic. I have written so much about this topic, and I feel as though that there are ways that inequity can be stopped, and people just don't want to take the proper precautions to end inequity because of the redlining in the districts and gerrymandering and all that good stuff. So I feel as though the proper precautions to take would be to reallocate funding. You don't have to allocate all your funds to high income neighborhoods. They don't need it. So why are you allocating your funds to that area when they already have enough? You can also utilize and leverage the assets within your community. So for example, the community I work in has a lot of recreation centers, golf courses, other schools. There's like 10 schools in miles of radius from each other. So you can really partner with these schools, nonprofits, all that, churches, to make your community have the same amount of resources. Even though you don't have the funding, you could still leverage those assets to kind of balance out what you're missing. But a lot of communities don't do that because they don't have the knowledge of how. And then the third way is just simply petitioning, getting your local government, your local social worker to advocate for you to say, hey, look, we need more funding and this is how we will get it. So that's my thoughts on it. And so this is our talking piece, and I'm going to put it to my left. And now I would like your thoughts on education inequity.
I agree with everything that you said. If I could add to it, it would be basically in where would we take those funds and apply them to? Where are we taking the funds from and applying them to? So as an idea of where we could take it from, this is a heavy topic that everybody's discussing right now about defunding the police departments. When they say defund the police, they're not really saying we don't want the police. They're saying that we can use some of the resources that are given to the police departments and, as you stated, reallocate those funds in areas that we need it most, which are in the impoverished neighborhoods. So with that being said, oftentimes police officers are called to a scene that a social worker should have been called to because this particular individual may have a mental health issue. So policing, they are not equipped to handle that type of phone call. So if we took the funds that they used for the police department for handling mental health issues or student police officers, we would be able to actually take those funds and put it into the neighborhoods that they're actually calling about. Because oftentimes if they're called, it's not in those neighborhoods that are well funded. So I think that that is a way that, in speaking of taking funds from somewhere and allocating them to the lower income areas, and also providing programs and outlets for the students that live in these impoverished neighborhoods to be able to get more help, whether it's a social worker giving mental health or tutoring or anything of that nature. So I say, let's find out where we're going to get the funds from, reallocate them to where they're needed most, and take it from there.
Okay, thank you.
I think when you think about the equity that you spoke on, it shows that we're not equal. When you look at funding, whether it's defunding and or funding, as you spoke to, we often see that the reason why we don't see so much perhaps brutality or wrong done situations in areas where the funding is lucrative and where people have money and the economy is stimulated. And then those places where there is poverty, we see a lot of these issues happen there. And there was a show that I was watching where there was and I wish I remembered the name, but there was a guy, he was smart, but he lived in the hood. And so he would travel from the hood all the way to the good school. And we went to the good school, they had big houses and their parents flew private jets, and they didn't understand what his struggle was and why he fought so hard in the education system to go to that good school.
Right.
And so then he would commute all the way back to the hood, and they just couldn't understand. And when he went back to the hood, the people in the hood, that was like, oh, you're the rich boy now, you hang with the rich people. And so there's this stigma that smart means rich, it means money, and that you can't be smart in the hood. So then there's this internal battle that he was dealing with, seeing his brother die and seeing police do things in his neighborhood. But when he went to the nice neighborhood, things were done differently.
Yes.
And I think that money really drives and enforces, and a lot of these people in richer neighborhoods or richer communities, those governors are shake hands and fellowship, so to speak, with the parents and with the cousins and go to, and the families donate money to campaigns. So it's really an infrastructure that really needs to be dug into, and I think that this topic is really relevant to the time and place that we are today.
Absolutely, thank you.
When I think about the equity that you spoke of, I'm thinking about the fundraisers that all the schools have, and I'm thinking, where does this money go? We see the fundraisers, we see the kids knocking on doors, they're selling the candy, they're selling the Christmas cards, but where does this money go? We have to find a way where we can actually come together and actually find out where these funds are going so that they can be placed in a proper place, because it doesn't look like they're placing them in the schools. If anything, they're getting tissues and small items, paper clips and pencils for these children, but they're not getting them the help that they need when they're doing fundraisers. So they need to actually deepen those fundraisers, find out where those funds are going, and actually really allocate them to where they are actually needed. Also, the PTA meetings, I think they need to go beyond the schools. I believe the parents need to form PTAs within their communities, which you all spoke of. With these PTAs, they can also come up with different ideas in which they can reach out to their local congressmen, the ones who are in charge of the funds, to make sure that the children are not forgotten, because that's what we're living in. We're living in a society where the children are being forgotten, and the upper echelons of Congress and the superintendents and principals of the school, they seem not to worry about those things. So we really need to get the parents together, form a community outside of the school, PTA, a community PTA base. Also, find out where this money is going for the fundraisers. Do something about it and get these funds together for the schools.
Awesome, thank you. And so, you guys mentioned PTAs a lot, which is something I advocate a lot for. From an educator's perspective, I will say that PTAs, what happens when parents don't care? Because I work in an area where parents literally do not care. They drop their kids off to the school, and that's that. I'll, hey, are you coming to the parent-teacher conference? What's that? When? Why? There's no interest. So how can we gain interest and form these alliances and form these PTAs if the parents and the community is not engaged with the school itself? And so before I pass the baton over, I'm just going to read this fun fact to you all. So according to a report by Emma Garcia and Elaine Weiss, I think that's how you say your name, research has shown that social class is one of the most significant predictors in a child's educational success. Furthermore, the article goes on to talk about performance gaps and how hard it is for students to catch up once they've fallen behind. Children are falling behind at the hand of poverty and inequity. This is an issue that needs immediate attention. And so I have this data here. This is data from Virginia. So high poverty schools in Virginia and low poverty schools in Virginia. As you can see, the likelihood is almost half in high poverty schools compared to low poverty schools. Almost 100% of their children are likely to graduate and go and be successful, quote unquote, whereas only half in high poverty schools are. Secondly, my second point is that another way to improve these schools and have equity would be to increase the teacher salary. It's a $10,000 difference between high poverty and low poverty schools. Why is that? Why are these funds going to the teachers rather than to the school? So just to deepen the conversation, I would like to know your thoughts on what I just said, the data I just provided, and how this has affected you or your children personally.
That's actually an outstanding question because y'all are my children. And we were raised in a low poverty district. And there was a thing called schools to prisons. And what the findings were in low poverty areas, that it was more likely for the for the high poverty students to end up in prison versus the low poverty schools. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the reasons why we selected to move from the high poverty area and give you an opportunity in a low poverty school, because it increased your chances of being able to get into a great college or get the education that should be afforded to you regardless of what district you live in. Your poverty stance should not determine your education. So as far as that's how it relates to you guys growing up. Myself, I was in a high poverty school, and in transparency, I did struggle more than some friends that I knew that were in low poverty areas. And it was because, one, as you mentioned, the salaries were greatly different. And when the salary is different and the area is different, you have teachers who unfortunately don't put in as much or have the materials to really give you the chances of a low poverty district.
Right.
So in saying that, that is part of the reason why I know myself and a lot of parents will opt to leave certain areas and give their children opportunities that I myself didn't have growing up. So I knew that this was going to be an issue. So I took it upon myself, along with Dad, to make sure that that wasn't going to be a problem for you. But in that, going back to the school to prison thing, when you take funds from the government and you're utilizing those funds from taxes or whatever to build bigger prisons because of a high poverty school district, as opposed to taking those funds and pouring it into the high poverty district to alleviate the need for the prison, is where I feel we have it wrong. And if we did that, it could change the trajectory of a lot of young people's lives, because the money is being focused in the wrong areas. And going back to the children being forgotten, that's often what happens. You have written them off based on where they live at, which they have no control over, and based on, okay, this is the result of living here, usually will create the need for a prison, as opposed to saying, let me fund them properly so that we won't need the prison in the first place. So I hope that kind of answered the direction you were going in.
I would in lieu of brevity, I would change the trajectory to going back to where this started. This started way back when Willie Lynch came over, right in Virginia, and he said, okay, we don't have slaves anymore. We can't, they said we can't. Check it out. Here's how we have slaves for at least the next 300 years. He goes through the alphabet: age, place of birth, color. He goes on, demographic. So we have West Coast, East Coast, North, South, so on and so forth. And so then it's like, okay, fast forward, and that, I did my dissertation in 2016, and that marked 305 years after he said it. 305.
Wow.
Now we're in 2020, and we still see modern day slavery just done in a whole different type of way. So if I can keep this group of people impoverished, then they will go into the system, they will be in the system, and then most likely there will be a reoccurrence in the system, in and out of jail, dead. Great. I didn't publicly lynch anybody, I didn't stab anybody, and Lord knows we're seeing it regardless, you know, even amidst the pandemic, we're seeing it playing out in the open, but still the subliminal and the hidden racism and slavery that is going on is very intricate to this entire study. And the research that you just shown started way before a school system, way before a district, way before public PS so-and-so, way before the PTA, way before that even happened. And so it's a condition. It's a condition of the mind. And so to your point with the PTA, it's how do we then begin to influence the mind? And so that's where I think there's a root before there is this big thing that we're seeing presently going on.
I like that.
And to piggyback off of some of the things that you said, what I realized is that they don't afford those opportunities and programs where for individuals, students to come out and be successful. For example, where I grew up at, we didn't have the military to come and say, well, you can come join the military. We didn't have the police department to say, well, you can be a police officer, or the fire department. We had to figure it out on our own. And what our role models were, they were not the police and they were not the army, they were actually the drug dealers on the corner. So in the high poverty areas, you followed what was in front of you, which was the drug dealers. It wasn't the main stream that's going to actually help you to grow to be successful. And then also with the low paying of teachers, they tended just to push you through as opposed to actually pass you according to what you knew and what your knowledge was. But they just pushed a lot of us through just because they didn't care, the parents didn't care, so why should they? So it's a shame, and it really bothers me that that's still going on today.
Thank you. And so now I'm going to put my little baton away and just going to open the floor. Whoever would like to chime in can chime in. I just ask that you do a finger or something so I know that you're trying to chime in. And so I think it's funny that you mentioned Willie Lynch and all of that, because there's an article that I'm actually using for my current project that says schools are like the new prisons, because of the increase of SROs, which are student resource officers. For y'all who don't know, student resource officers are officers that stand guard in the middle of the hallway and they serve no purpose. That's who they are. So with the increase of that and the increase of feeling like students are more violent, especially in high poverty neighborhoods, they're saying schools are the new prisons, because teachers are so quick to say, just go, just leave. Students are dropping out at higher rates, especially in high poverty neighborhoods. So all of that definitely plays in to this topic that we're talking about. And then going back to influencing the mind and the PTA and affording those opportunities. So as y'all know, I worked for City Year, which is what they were doing were great. We came in as an extra resource to help build the students in the school. We helped give them mentorship, we helped create events that they didn't have, we tutored them, we taught them, increase their grades, make sure they didn't drop out, make sure they were able to graduate, all that good stuff. However, the issue with the program was the fact that we were still charging a high poverty school. They don't have the funding as is. So it's not a matter of okay, well, I have the resource, but you still have to pay me for it, though. It's a matter of who's willing to stand up and speak up on behalf of the children, because at the end of the day, they're the ones suffering, not the principals, because they make $90K a year, not the assistant principal who makes $70K a year, not the superintendent who makes close to $100K a year. It's the students who are suffering. So who is going to come into the school, whether it is a principal or a guidance counselor or whatever the case may be, who's going to come into the school and say, hey, we need a PTA, are you with me? Hey, I'm the social worker who's going to advocate for these youth, let's form an alliance. Hey, let's change the funds from going to this event to this event, let's stop buying miscellaneous items and put it into actually getting qualified teachers. Because high poverty schools don't have qualified teachers. Their teachers quit at a higher rate because of the low salary and the bad kids, as they say. And so how can we just have a mindset of not money, 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 money in terms of us being resources? How can we just help as the regular everyday person? Because everybody's not a social worker, everybody's not a teacher, everybody's not, in the school system. So how can you, even if you don't have kids, help as a person who actually cares about this subject?
If I can chime in, I would say local leaders. We need local leadership. And I love the saying, each one teach one. You're saying about money coming into the schools and how can we build a better community. That would be really, I believe, as a parent, that parents can play the biggest role in doing that, in forming a union, so to speak, not literal, but of some type of union together to ensure that those needs that are being met, that need to be met are actually met through, like you said, PTA, but like I believe Mark said it, Dad said it, that having a community type PTA. Local leaders have always been the people who have come in and tried to, restructure and formulate a better community or school system. I think it's going to take a group effort of parents or a leader in the community. Every community has one for the most part. At least when I was growing up, we knew who that person was that was trying to make a difference. What happens most of the time is people don't want to be bothered or don't know or have the knowledge to do the things that's needed. But a local leader usually is that person who already has done the research, they know who to contact, they know those things. As a parent, it is my responsibility to then, if I see there's something missing in this particular school, let me be the answer to that problem. And I think if each of us would get that mindset on, it's not my children okay. If one child is not okay, regardless if my children are fine, if a child is not okay, it's that village mentality that we did have growing up in the 70s or whatever. There was a village. That saying, it took a village to raise a child, was literal. And that's what we need to get back to, the village, and really helping other people not be so selfish, saying my children are fine, they get good grades, but what about that child that seems like they're struggling? It could be because it comes from a single parent home and the mother is doing the best that she could. My mom was a single mother. She had 3 children, and so she couldn't be there to help me with my homework. So my aunt, she could. So and my neighbor could, or something to that degree. It took a village, and if we get back to that village mentality of not just looking the other way, but actually be willing to get your hands dirty, we can save a lot of children from that gateway from school to prison.
And I just would hate to be a Debbie Downer. I think in 2020 a village sounds great. I think in 2020 we have pedophiles. I think in 2020 we have rapists. I think in 2020 we have people that, and so it's very hard, unfortunately. People are protective of their children.
I agree with that.
And the neighbor might be a little strange. So,
that is true.
you know, it's kind of difficult. I think we're in a hard place in the state of our world. The state of our nation, where who can we trust?
That's true.
If we can't trust our leadership at the top, how can I trust my neighbor around the corner?
Right.
If I don't know what news is real and what's fake, how do I know if my neighbor who said I'm gonna help with the homework really helping with the homework?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I think that we're in a rough spot.
Yeah.
We're in a different age. We're in a different time. We don't have a village mentality. That would take more. It takes a lot, you know.
Yeah, I agree.
So
with
it's
that.
kind of difficult because I love it. One of your consultant, Christina, she always talks about a village and she speaks to a village and I believe in the village, but I'm just disheartened because we have all of these factors that keep us like kind of scared to tap into that village. So I think you do, you know, and it's hard, but you do have to tap into, I guess, your churches and your local communities and your local community and organizations that you can trust, but it's super hard. Even with that, and we've seen, you know, so we've seen disparities with that. But I don't want to answer a question with a question, but I just wanted to say that. But I do have a question because you were speaking about like the SROs and things of that nature. What role then do guidance counselors
Glad you asked.
play in this narrative?
That's the thing. They
That's
don't.
good. I like that.
That's the thing. They literally don't. I can tell you, I only had an encounter with a guidance counselor maybe 3 times within my whole school career. And that was once in elementary school, maybe another time to get me through middle school, and the last time when I graduated. 3 times. I never had a guidance counselor since, and I haven't seen a guidance counselor do their job since I've worked in the school system. So the problem is here. So I interned with a school psychologist who's supposed to be like a counselor of sorts. She didn't do her job. She looked at data, which is apparently all that guidance counselors do nowadays is look at data. Data does not tell you anything, okay? Data does not mean your child is smart. Data does not mean your child is not smart. Data has nothing to do with anything. Focus on the whole school, whole child, and you'll get to the bottom line of what is going on with the child instead of data. I don't get that. But literally, the guidance counselor that I worked with at my job last year, she was rarely ever there. If I needed her, she would give me some posters, but other than that, she'd sign a CPS report and be gone.
CPS is
Child Protective Services. She'd sign a report and that's that. And even with that, she was iffy. She was like, oh no, she's fine, that's normal. That's not normal. If a child is coming to me crying saying something happened to her, that's not normal. This is why children run away. This is why children feel unheard. This is why children feel forgotten, because you're saying, oh, that's normal, or oh, you're overreacting. Get over it. You're a guidance counselor. Counsel the students. And then they're not paying counselors anymore. So social workers are trying to step in now. So we have school social workers, we have clinical social workers, and community social workers who are trying to take the role of counselors, because counselors, unfortunately, are not equipped anymore. They sit in their office, they're there, but they don't counsel. So I don't know what the answer or the solution is to that, because I thought that was your job. You went to school for this, so I'm assuming that's why you're here. If you don't want to be a guidance counselor, if you don't have a heart for kids, don't do it. That's my advice, because you're not helping the process. You're just there to get a check, and you're part of the problem. So that's why I say, and like I said about the SROs, basically what our project is saying is defund SROs and import school social workers. Because for every high poverty school, there's only one guidance counselor and maybe one school social worker. Whereas in a low poverty school, there's about 4 social workers, 2 school psychologists, and 2 guidance counselors.
Wow.
So, you know, that's my spiel on that. So,
could it be, if I may, could it be that the guidance counselors are restricted from how much guidance or counsel they are allotted or allowed to give? I'm not exactly sure. I don't know what the protocol is now. I just can go by what my experience was as a child with the way guidance counselors really worked. So I'm curious as to now in the 2020 age, which piggybacking off of what he said, he's absolutely right. It's hard to be a village. So it's almost like you have to entrust people that you really do know. That's why it's important to get to know your neighbors. And to do, I don't mean no harm, everybody, but you should be doing checks on who live around you because pedophiles, as he spoke of, was around back in our day too. But what we have afforded to us in this digital age is this gadget right here, and telephones to your fingertips, the Google friend that we use so often, but you have to register if you're a sex offender. Well, a convicted one. See, let's be clear. So you have to register, and I don't want to detour off of it, but I was thinking about the whole picture with the guidance counselors and being able to go to people and to the guidance counselor and share things about what may be happening in your household, and it not being unheard or not taken seriously. And then we have that Gabriel, what's his name, Hernandez situation where he was coming to school beat up, bruised, and broken, and it wasn't until he ended up killed by his mother's boyfriend and everything that it was made public, and it became this big trial. And this was a 10-year-old little boy. And so the guidance counselor, the teacher, saw these things. And so what is the restriction? The guidance counselor is there, the resource officers are there. Yes, an in-school social worker would be great, but like you mentioned, here it is, an impoverished school gets one versus a low poverty school gets all these resources, hence why there's less issues. But at the same time, in a low poverty school, we have a high school shooting. You don't hear of school shootings in the lower income or impoverished neighborhoods. Let's be real. And so there's different things that's happening on both sides of the spectrum, and each of those things require social worker, guidance counsel, or something like that. So what is the restriction? Why is it that outside of just assuming, because we really don't know every guidance counselor to be able to say they don't want to do their job or whatever. I know that certain districts, because of the funding, they don't get paid the amount of money that they should. I get that. Same thing with teachers or whatever. So what is the real issue with the guidance counselors being able to really do their job? What is it, something now in place where people, where they're not, are they restricted?
I think, piggybacking off of everything that you all said, and I thought about the village as well, and it's the sad part is that the parents are working so much so that they can't even pay attention to their own children, so they don't even know how to even address their children to even make things better for the school, because they're working, they're out of the house 8 to 12 hours a day. So when they come home, they're tired, they don't really address the children. So much is going on in the house. The children don't speak to the parents. We have these gadgets now. Everything is so separated where they're not sitting together anymore at the table. They're not checking homework anymore. So kids are not doing their homework or what they're supposed to do. So when they do have these PTA meetings, as you have experienced, most of the parents don't even show up anymore. So how can we help make the school better if we're not doing what we need to do first in the home to make things better there, then matriculate it out into the schools as well? So how do we do that?
You guys bring up two very good points. I'll talk to yours first. I can't speak to the restriction of a guidance counselor. I'm not a guidance counselor yet. But I know for a fact that the main, the ethics aren't that different from a school social worker and a guidance counselor. And just like we have a duty to report, they do too. We literally have to sign a contract saying whether I'm a licensed or non-licensed guidance counselor, I still have a duty to report. If I hear something that sounds weird or odd, I have to report it. So when I bring a child to a guidance counselor and she just pushes them away, she's not doing her job because you have a duty to report, period. So that's the main concern. They are still allowed to give advice. They are still allowed to have group therapy sessions, because she did it sometimes, but again, she was rarely ever there. But that was the case with a lot of the leadership at the school. They were rarely ever there. They just didn't show up, which was weird. But yeah, they still can come into the classrooms and have those talks like, hey, we had DARE back in the day.
Mhm.
They don't they don't do it now, but
Yeah.
we had DARE, and usually that was led by a guidance counselor and
Yeah.
maybe a police officer.
Right.
But they don't do those activities anymore, and I think that goes back to the funding, because they don't have the funding to get the police officers and all the events and
Right.
everything that we had when we were younger. So okay, I'll cut you some slack there, but in terms of just checking in on a student, that's not illegal, that's not against ethics, that's your job. At the end of the day, the contract says this is what you're supposed to do.
Right.
And I'm going based off of the school social work contract that I read. So I don't know what the difference is or why they're not as invested or involved in children's lives, but I would like to see a change in that. And then going back to your point, which I just lost my frame of thought. Wow.
It's okay.
It's all right. Going back to that, you had mentioned the village. Oh, okay, there we go.
Bring it back.
All right.
You said they're very disconnected nowadays, which is totally true. Literally, the kids would come to school and be like, Miss Miracle, can I get it? He laughs every time I say that. Miss Miracle, can I get on the computer? Can I get on the laptop? Can I do this? We're in the middle of reading class. Pay attention. Like, what?
It's real.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't understand. So it's a very disconnected society, and that does bring up the fact that, well, that's a form of neglect as well. If y'all aren't, interacting with your children, keeping up with them. So again, that goes back to the duty to report. If you're seeing the child not doing their work constantly, not showing up to school constantly because they have to take care of younger siblings, because that happens, then you still should call the house. That was in my job description when I worked there. We have to call the house and make sure, hey, why isn't little Susie showing up today? Is everything okay? If they answer, great. If they don't, you did your job at least. So it does make it very hard in that aspect. But just to wrap it up, because I don't want to go too long, the main recommendations that I had written up to submit was A, like I said earlier, leverage those resources. Yes, the village thing is touchy now, but a lot of these high poverty communities are already a village. So it's not an issue of it takes a village, it's an issue of let's leverage the village that we have. Because a lot of people, like you said, are busy and they're not paying attention. And they're like, oh, John will watch my kid and hopefully they're doing the right thing, type of situation. But in the community that I studied and worked in and did my research on, they have churches everywhere. They have the recreation centers everywhere. They have us who came in to help the schools. They had the homeless shelter around the street. So you have all these resources, but y'all aren't working together. So my first recommendation was to work together. If you need mentorship programs, go to the recreation center down the street, say, hey, we would like to partner with you all to start a mentorship. Go to the golf course across the way and say, hey, we would like to partner with you to bring a different after school event to our school, which is what my school did. They went to the golf course and we taught golf on Saturdays, I think, for the students. And so just utilizing different aspects in that way. Another way to increase funding as well is to link up with the people in the community, link up with the nonprofits, and link up with the churches to start beautification projects. If your community looks run down, that's when you get written off as a red line community. So why not get together for a day, which is what we were in the process of before COVID. We were starting a beautification project in that area. Why not get a couple of us to come together and say, hey, let's paint the school and make it look pretty. Hey, let's fix up the shingles on the house a little bit. And that'll increase the appeal so that people are more likely to invest and say, oh, this isn't a red line community like we thought. And you'll get up in the ranks, which is unfortunate that you have to do all that. But, and then the last one is just simply allocate the funds like you're supposed to allocate the funds. And that's just that. But anybody else have any last words?
I think my last word was, well, I think it's also the efficacy of the project or of the program, because I know a lot of folks that did DARE. okay, in the fifth grade or something like that. And still got DUIs and DWIs and had a sip of something or smoked something.
Okay.
And because you did it in fifth, you did it, drug abuse resistance education. That is great. You taught them in fifth grade when they didn't even really know what a blunt was.
Yeah.
Okay, they didn't really even see what alcohol was and what it does.
Right.
You know, and I can kind of recall it back in fifth grade. It didn't really show the negative, the true negative effects of drugs. It was very like, oh, you could go to jail, or oh, you could do this.
Right.
And no, it didn't show the real nitty gritty.
Right.
So then let's
Like
not just stop at fifth
Right.
grade.
Keep it
Fifth
going.
grade, let's try this again in middle school.
Okay.
Let's try this again
When
in
it
high
actually
school.
starts.
Let's bring somebody in that physically went through it and has fully recovered. You know, so the efficacy, I think, of programs, it's not just let's have a program, because there's a lot of churches with 100 programs.
Yeah.
There's a lot of schools or communities with 20 programs and this and the third, or there's a lot in college, I'm sure you saw, the Black Student Organization, the NAACP, the Black Events Board, why are we all separated and not coming together as one body?
Right.
So I think a lot of times we speak about like programs,
Yeah.
but it's like, okay, let's not just create program, let's create an effective program that really eradicates change, that really affects the community in a positive way. And I think that is something that I've seen. It's like, it's a bunch of programs, a bunch of student activities and student organizations, whatever they call them. But how effective are we being? Are we actually separating that village, or are we bringing that village together? So I think that's kind of my last thought on in terms of the village.
You know, that's a great point, because a lot of people have programs just to have programs, just to say that they have them.
Right.
Like, oh, make me look like I'm a great school, like many of these.
And the
charter
state will
schools.
bring more funds.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's the
then
only
use
reason.
those funds, and as he stated, and where is it going?
To my bank
Because
account.
the proof is in the effective program.
Right.
I received the money, and this is what I did with it, and you are known by the fruit you bear.
Yeah.
Bottom line, that's the way I will leave it for me, is you are known by the fruit you bear.
Yeah.
And I'll just leave it with this. Everything that you said as far as effective programming, but you heard the saying, knowledge is power. I've always said, applied knowledge is power. Because if you don't have the knowledge but you don't apply it, then what good is it?
Right.
And that's it.
Awesome. Well, I think that concludes our cafe convo.
Awesome.
And I think
Loved
this
it.
was a great conversation, and I hope to see you guys again soon.
All right. Yes. Great conversation.
And to all my followers, I saw that. Thank you. Follow Trooper Inc.